we want to keep moving forward. Other aspects, and we've been sort of hitting this, moving through. But the role of Iran, the role they're playing, and what we can expect next. And on that score and many others, we are very, very happy to be joined by Mazda Majidi, who's an organizer with the Answer Coalition. Mazda, as always, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thanks. Great to be here.
Well,
good work, by the way.
Oh, well, listen, I appreciate that. And we are very happy to have you here. One thing that we're hearing a lot, Mazda, is that the era of strategic patience in Iran has ended. And, it's a phrase I've heard a lot of different ways. And I'm curious, well, A, if you think that is even an accurate characterization of what we've been seeing here since the Iranian response to the Israeli attacks on them. But also, if you do think it's correct, what does it really mean in terms of Iran's posture in this current situation?
Well, I think when we think about the time when the U.S. under Trump assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's reaction was extremely measured, basically sending missiles, showing that they can do it, made sure that no one would get killed. And it was very limited. And in fact, the first time in April that Iran did send drones and missiles to Israel, that also was, very much calculated to minimize any real damage, just to make a statement. But I think, contrary to what we hear in the West about Iran being so aggressive and so forth, we know that Israel is the ultra-aggressive state. And I think it has reached a point where Iran sees that even if all of its motivation is deterrence, it has to do something. And I think what happened last Friday, the Friday prayers on October 4th in Tehran, widely unreported or underreported in the West, but it's very, very significant, showing a different level of readiness for the struggle. As you know, Friday prayers happen in Tehran and other cities all the time. Ordinarily, it's not Khamenei, the leader who leads the Friday prayers. In fact, the last time he had done it was in 2020, after the assassination of Soleimani. But this time, what was significant about it is that several days in advance, Khamenei and others announced that it would happen in Tehran, the Friday prayers. And not only that, they announced that there would be ceremonies in commemoration of Hezbollah leader Sayyid, I'm blanking on his name, which is shameful, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And so therefore, it was several hours of the presence of Khamenei and many top leaders in Tehran at the Friday prayers. Now, a lot of people, myself included, thought that Israel would bomb Iran at that time, send missiles, and assassinate Khamenei. And in fact, social media was full of warnings that to people, don't go. If you go, you'll get killed in an Israeli bombing. And it seemed like a credible threat. And so what happened was that Khamenei, the 85-year-old leader, is there, standing there, showing that he's not afraid of Israel. He's there for hours. He's holding a rifle in his disabled hand, indicating, willingness to continue the struggle. And over 1 million people attended. They ignored all the warnings. They took the chance of getting killed in a potential Israeli bombing. And in fact, some people showed up the night before in hopes of getting in. The vast majority of the 1 million people couldn't even make it to the inside. They were in the areas around it. And, there were significant disruptions because of the number of people attending to the metro service and bus service, and traffic was stalled and everything. But basically, this was, I think, a signal of a different period, of a period in which the Islamic Republic of Iran and the people are declaring their readiness for struggle. It wasn't a show of power per se. It was a show of willingness to struggle and sacrifice and risk lives. It was very significant. And if we have time, we can talk about at least why I think Israel didn't do the missile attack. But I think it was a very significant thing, and I think Israel and the U.S. are watching as well.
So, Mazda, there's a couple things I want to ask you about here. And this is a conversation I think a lot of people are having. I know we're talking about the strategic patience and how perhaps the hesitancy to respond to Israel has resulted in Netanyahu feeling emboldened. I mean, we've seen that pattern. Some have said that this actually, one of the mistakes that was made earlier this year was Hezbollah not responding strongly enough to Israel targeting the southern suburb of Beirut back in January to kill Hamas leader Salah el-Aruri. Their response was, I think, to fire some missiles into northern Israeli military installations, and then to call it a day. And from then on, it became clearer and clearer to Israel that every time they crossed something that had been called a red line by the resistance axis, they weren't actually going to get the response that was promised. And I think Iran is maybe coming to that conclusion now. So I am curious if you think that's where the thinking might be at in terms of this is a lunatic country that is run by a Nazi-like figure at this point who will keep expanding, who will keep retaliating, who will keep making this a bigger war until he is deterred. And the only way to reestablish deterrence is to strike back. And that can't just be symbolic gestures and waiting till the time and place of our choosing, right? That's one. And I guess where I'm leading to with that is this making, do you think the Iranian leadership reconsider their ideas around having nuclear weapons? Because we know that having nuclear weapons does act, in fact, as a deterrence. And for a long time, Iran has said, no, we won't have nuclear weapons. There's a fatwa against creating nuclear weapons. And now there are a lot of, there is a debate inside Iran that's become quite a public one about whether that's wise to continue on that path, given everything that's happened.
Rania, there's a lot to talk about there. One thing that I think that's very important for us who are in solidarity with the Palestinian people to realize is, as much as we would like to have a tit for tat between Hezbollah or Ansarullah or Hamas and Israel, the forces are asymmetrical. Israel is one of the most militaristic states in the world. It is supplied by the U.S. It is provided funding by the U.S. So it's not even just Israel. And so the problem is when you're fighting an enemy courageously and taking chances against an enemy that is far better armed and far stronger, your options are kind of limited. And as much as many of us would like to see tit for tat between Iran and Israel or Hezbollah and Israel, a lot of times that's not the reality on the ground. I think what has happened, and it's very significant, and even in the region, we couldn't say that 5 years ago, certainly not 10, 15 years ago, is that Iran now has the capability to inflict some damage on Israel. And that is very significant. But that's not to say that Iran has the equivalent military force to Israel. And then the other thing, which I believe all the forces of the axis of resistance are very conscious of, is the fact that Netanyahu in particular and the Israeli ruling class broadly have wanted for decades to make this a regional conflict because they want to pull the U.S. in. And this was true when Bush II was president and during Obama and Trump and so forth. Israel desperately wants to get the U.S. to invade Iran and occupy Iran. And of course, as you're dealing with forces that have far bigger military might than you do, you have to play your cards carefully. So yes, Rania, I do agree that Iran has reached a point of deciding that just exercising patience and self-restraint is not going to work. I know that many people were critical after Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran, while Tehran kept saying that we are going to punish Israel, we are going to respond, but they hadn't done that till October 1st. But if you're part of the Iranian leadership, on the one hand, you want to show support and solidarity with the Palestinian resistance and the resistance to Zionism and imperialism in the region in general. but at the same time, you want to go only as far as to not make it inevitable for the US to start bombing or possibly invading and occupying. So it is very difficult. And as much as those on the progressive side want to see Israel punished and the settler colonial state of Israel defeated, we also have to look at the real balance of forces, which, by the way, is moving in the direction of changing, because I think it is realistic to think that Israel is getting gradually weakened. That's not something that we're going to see Israel collapse tomorrow, but there are many signs that Israel is suffering consequences beyond the military consequences of the ongoing war.
Well, Mazda, I'm glad you raised the relationship of forces, because it seems the other aspect of what Iran is doing, and this goes back to President Raisi, is, very aggressively pushing the diplomatic course with various other Arab countries, particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. We have, the president of Iran meeting with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia. You've got the Iranian foreign minister meeting with Mohammed bin Salman and a number of top officials. You had the interesting sequence of events, I thought, that as soon as it seemed like Biden was like, okay, with the oil and gas bombing by Israel, the GCC comes out and says, we're totally neutral and we'll never allow them to use our territory to attack Iran, because obviously they don't want to lose their own oil and gas. But it seems that Iranian diplomacy has also taken a big step forward here in the last year, because they are trying to play on these contradictions that even these pro-U.S. entities like the Saudi Arabias of the world have their own self-interest that Iran is appealing to.
That's a major change. And I know all of us, the gut-wrenching scenes of Israeli genocide in Gaza makes it even difficult to follow the news. But if you think of the period prior to October 7, 2023, in fact, weeks before it, in September 23, Mohammed bin Salman was making statements saying it's only a matter of weeks, not even months, weeks, before we reach a diplomatic agreement with Israel. And these are states, including very specifically Saudi Arabia and the person of bin Salman, who were effectively for years and years lobbying the US to invade and bomb Iran. I mean, these countries were begging the US to do something about Iran. And now, as a result of the change in the balance of forces and as a result of the resistance of the Palestinians and the supporters across the Arab world, now we're seeing this, Eugene. And that's very significant, that one reactionary monarchy in the Persian Gulf after another is making statements. Even Jordan is making a statement, no, we're not going to take part in any attacks on Iran. We're not going to let our soils be used. Now, of course, the U.S. has military bases on the soils of these countries, and it's not going to ask for any permission from them, which is another colonial aspect of U.S. military bases around the world. But the fact that this posturing has, from the point of essentially lobbying for the U.S. to invade Iran, to saying, no, we're neutral and we're not going to take part and we're not going to let our soil or airspace be used for attacking Iran, is an indication of how far things have moved as a result of resistance, despite the fact that resistance has given significant casualties, has given severe cost. But things are not the same in the region as they were a year before.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, go ahead.
No, I'm good. I'm just... I just don't know what else to say anymore. Sorry, guys. This is just me also being, no, listen, I mean, it's really hard to watch Lebanon just be destroyed. It's like I'm watching in real time, and it's horrible because, we watched it happen to Gaza for a year. And so everything we're seeing, we've already seen the script before, we know when Israel and the US say A, what's about to happen next. And it somehow makes it even more torturous in a way to know that when you hear A, B, and C from these imperialists, from these Zionists, it's like you see the writing on the wall, you know what's about to happen next. And, I think that's the fear of the entire resistance axis. That's what they've been trying to do all year, is to manage this, to pressure Israel to stop while preventing it from spreading. And it's just scary because it just keeps spreading. And it's like there's no knowing when that stops. That's it. That's all I want to say to the end of this conversation.
Ronnie, let me just add this, and it's as painful as it is. I mean, we have to recognize, as much as in the West we hear all the BS about proxy forces and Iran stooges and so forth. I mean, what we are witnessing is a significant level of sacrifice, of solidarity on the part of the people of Lebanon and around the world. I mean, Hezbollah had no direct interest in getting into a confrontation with Israel. I mean, there was nothing happening at that border. It was completely in solidarity on the part of the Lebanese people and the axis of resistance for Hezbollah to start sending rockets and missiles into northern Israel, or as far into Israel as it could. So, and we're seeing the same thing even in Iraq. We're seeing support in Iran, and we're seeing it, of course, even in Yemen. I think there's something to be said about that, and that is that when Israel started its recent round of genocide in Gaza, it is no longer true that the world stood by quietly. And in fact, a number of people stood up, showed solidarity, and they're paying the price for it. Also, I want to say there's a possibility, I don't want to make predictions, but across the Arab world, there's unrest. We know that in Egypt, we know that in Jordan. And so another unknown in this equation as the conflict continues is how much these right-wing governments of Arab states are going to be pressured or potentially even destabilized as a result of their own people wanting to rise up and show solidarity with Palestinians. So as painful as it is to watch these developments, there's positives in terms of solidarity and struggle as well.
No, certainly. The solidarity is important. And I'll also add to what you said. I actually do think Hezbollah may have had, an interest in involving itself in the sense of, one thing Hassan Nasrallah said in his first speech after October 7th was, yes, we're doing this to support Gaza, but also there's the whole issue of if Gaza is destroyed, Lebanon is next. And that wasn't wrong, actually, because now Lebanon is next. And I think that's what we see. This is why Israel's so difficult to deal with, because there are no red lines anymore. And it's like something is always next. They haven't achieved their military objectives. And so they deal with that by expanding their war aims and destroying more. And we know ultimately that will weaken Israel, but man, in the process, how much is going to be destroyed? And that it's so unnecessary and completely preventable, but we have this international community that just sits on its hands, too cowardly to stand up to the Americans. And understandably so in a way, because, when you see what they do to Gaza, that's scary. You don't want that done to you. And the only forces that are willing to, put anything on the line are the weakest parts of the world the Yemenis, poorest country in the region. And look what they're willing to sacrifice, the Iraqis, the Iranians at this point, So it is interesting to see where everyone has fallen in the midst of a live streamed Holocaust. And I think one day when this is looked back on and written about, that will certainly be at the forefront of the history books.
Yeah, well, as Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there is no progress. And he said that 3 years before the Civil War, so it gives you a sense of the context. Mazda Majidi with the Answer Coalition, as always, a pleasure to have you with us here in the Freedom Side. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.